Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Asia Anew. It was a not-so-subtle swipe at the U.S. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan standing with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin as they viewed the Su-57 fighter jet, an aircraft many have called a direct competitor to the U.S.'s F-35. The two leaders met at a Russian air show on the outskirts of Moscow as Ankara's own defense ties with Washington were up in the air. The delivery of the second batch of the S-400 missile system to Turkey also came as they sat down to discuss possible defense cooperation. Turkey's purchase of the S-400 has created a deep rift with the U.S. and has all but ended Ankara's involvement in the F-35 program. But the meeting between President Erdogan and Putin wasn't entirely cordial. The Turkish president blamed the Russian-backed Assad regime of threatening peace in Syria with its continued bombardment of the last rebel enclave of Idlib. Erdogan also warned of a pending humanitarian crisis and that Turkey could take steps along its border to prevent a deepening crisis. And joining me now is Mehmet Öğütçü, who is a former Turkish diplomat, and Barçın Yinanç, who is a journalist at Hürriyet Daily News. Thank you for joining me on Straight Talk. It's good to have you on set. So, Mehmet, I want to start with you. How significant was President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin at an air show amid rising tensions in Idlib?
Well, as you know, the Turkish-Russian relations have been developing very, very fast and including so many new areas of collaboration. But this visit was an unexpected one, as far as I can understand, because of the crisis in Idlib getting deepened and becoming quite difficult to manage. President Erdogan and President Putin had a telephone call to resolve the issues, outstanding issues. It didn't work, I guess. Then President Erdogan wanted to fly and talk face-to-face with President Putin. But this visit also coincided with two things. One is the MAX aviation fair, in which the Russian latest technologies, fifth generation Su-57, Su-35, as well as military helicopters and all other things were on display. And from the Russian point of view, this was a good message. The second, I think, significance was that the second batch of S-400s came to Turkey.
Yes.
And this was also a message to Washington from Ankara perspective that if we are suspended, as it happened, from F-35 program, so there are other alternatives.
So, Barçın, do you believe that the two leaders managed to hammer out their differences over Idlib?
Well, looking to the statements, we do not get the feeling that the fundamental difference are overcome because the fundamental difference stems from their outlook to the existing forces in Idlib. As far as Russia is concerned, these are terrorist groups. And as far as Turkey is concerned, these are opposition groups. And Russia is claiming Turkey of not delivering on its word of separating, let's say, legitimate opposition forces from what Russia sees as terrorists.
Isn't it a bit hard to separate those real terrorists from opposition forces?
Obviously, but this has always been the case in all types of conflict zones. Your terrorist is not my terrorist, etc. But the key point here, I think, is that Putin and Erdogan make sure to give the message to the outside world that even if they disagree or even if they are not able to solve their fundamental differences, they will continue on working. And on that especially, I would say, Putin makes a point of not antagonizing openly Turkish president because he wants to use this relationship in order to give a message to the outside world and especially to Western alliance that he is succeeding in keeping Turkey away from the Western alliance. So on the appearance, they always they try to hide that they have real differences and they have difficulty in solving these differences, whereas it's clear that they fail on solving them.
And as for the formation of a safe zone along with Turkey's Syrian border, let's take a minute and listen to what Russian President Vladimir Putin said, and we'll continue to talk.
The creation of a security zone on the southern border of Turkey will become a good condition to ensure the territorial integrity of Syria. In this respect, we support any activity aimed at de-escalation in this area.
So, Mehmet, we just listened to the Russian president. What do you make of his statements? Is this swift in Russian policy, or is it just what Russia wants?
I think we need further elaboration from President Putin what he meant by saying that he's supporting efforts to de-escalate the conflict in
As well
Turkey's
as to,
southern borders. He says he understands Turkish sensitivities as well, security
But he also talks
concerns.
about Syria's territorial integrity.
Yes. I think also Turkey keeps saying it because no matter what happens in the east of Euphrates and west, we always stick to the basic principle of territorial integrity of Syria. And this also brings us the question of how Syria is looking into this situation. The US-Turkish understanding in creating a peace corridor along the Turkish border, thus separating Turkey from YPG forces equipped, fully trained by the United States. So I think it's not very wise to jump into conclusions right now in terms of what Russia and what Damascus will be saying about that. Also, it remains to be seen whether this arrangement between Washington and Ankara will be working. We have to wait and see how it works because the Washington's intention is quite clear. But the fact that Putin also thought this was an effort which will help de-escalation of the conflict is a positive sign. And we need to see also what Damascus will be saying about that. So any effort to de-escalate the situation in Idlib and east of Euphrates, I think in the interest of everybody. And we will have a critical meeting in Turkey
In the second half of September,
yes, where Rouhani, Putin, and Erdogan will come together and review the progress in the Astana process and also see what the additional steps could be. This is something Putin mentioned during the Moscow meeting with Erdogan.
So, Barchin, do you believe that the Astana process is still valid? And what do you make of Iran's position in the face of these latest developments?
Well, it's difficult to say that the process is alive, but the situation is so complicated that I don't think we should be sticking to the names or to the processes. I think each player in the field are sort of taking new positions according to new developments. What is clear is that Turkey has two probably new neighbors in itself. I mean, the main neighbor being Russia and the other neighbor being Iran. So that's why Turkey is trying to manage these two countries and also trying perhaps at times using United States. Although I would say there are a lot of problems with United States in terms of its existence there, in terms of its support to groups which Turkey sees as a terrorist, still I would rather say that its presence can be at times, can play as a leverage for Turkey against Iran and Russia, because at the end of the day, I'm not sure Turkey is happy to have Russia and Iran as additional neighbors in its southern frontier.
So, Mehmet, if promises given to Turkey are not met by the United States, do you believe there is a possibility that Turkey can unilaterally launch a military operation in the eastern Euphrates?
This is what Turkey says, because President Erdogan made it quite clear that if these promises and assurances will not be kept, we keep our option, Plan B.
Is it doable?
I think if we consider this as a vital national security interest, it should be done because there's no doubt that Turkey can do it because we have the world's eighth largest military, and they can easily carry out this operation. But this will create certain risks with the United States especially, because U.S. is quite adamant that they will protect YPG. And YPG is not just a small bandit groups. It's now about 60,000, 80,000 strong army, trained by Israelis and Americans in many ways. So it's going to be a tough conflict. Therefore, both sides will try to avoid that. But everybody says we understand Turkey's sensitivities and concerns. But what it means in reality is quite different. But Turkey has committed itself to an operation east of Euphrates so many times. So also credibility and deterrence might be eroded. So Turkey has to take some action, whatever this action might be.
So Barçın and Mehmet, thank you for joining me on Straight Talk. Appreciate it a lot. Turkey's foreign ministry recently announced a new diplomatic policy. It's a bold approach detailing how and where Turkey will build its economic, political, and cultural ties. And the region that will be getting that renewed focus will be Asia. It's part of a new foreign policy called the Asia Anew initiative. But as Ömer Kaplan reports, Turkey's new strategy isn't about abandoning ties with the West, but rather diversifying its options.
A new vision that will reshape Turkish foreign policy. The Asia Anew initiative. It's a bold plan from Turkey's foreign ministry that aims to create new links with Asian countries while strengthening existing ones.
Yeniden Asya açılımına
The international community is competing to better its relations with Asia. However, Turkey's advantage is that it shares a common history with the region. Just like it is valuable for us to be a European in Europe, it is also valuable for us to be an Asian in Asia.
The foreign policy shift will cover a vast network of opportunities, from education, defense, trade, to cultural and political dialogue. It's a sharp departure from Turkey's traditional position of focusing almost entirely on the Western world when it came to trade and security. But analysts have been quick to point out that Turkey's new approach is independent of its historical positions.
Turkey's relations with Asia, they don't necessarily have to develop as a function of its relations with the West. So these are two separate things. Getting closer with Asia, building constructive relations with Asia, concrete relations with Asia is a must in this world because Asia is the new economic powerhouse.
Asia is home to a rapidly expanding middle class, which is expected to grow to 1.75 billion people by 2020, making up half the world's total. According to data from the UN, Asian economies will also be larger than the rest of the world combined by 2020. It's a shift in the global economy that's been dubbed the Asian century. And that's why Turkey is betting a large part of its future economic policies on the region. The Asia Anew initiative will see that plan through. It consists of four main pillars: enhancing interstate relations, expanding private sector trade, improving academic cooperation, and boosting tourism and cultural exchanges. Turkey has long been trying to engage more with Asian countries, hoping to tap into one of the fastest growing regions. Turkey became a dialogue partner of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in 2017. Turkey is also taking part in China's Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion project that will connect most of the Eurasian landmass.
Turkey is located very much at the center of this route. I mean, one only needs to have a look at the map to see why Turkey matters for the Belt and Road Initiative. This project can give Turkey an opportunity window working with the Chinese or other stakeholders, not only the Chinese.
Bilateral meetings between Turkey and Asian leaders have also increased in recent years. One of the most recent was President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's visit to China in July, following his attendance to the G20 summit in Japan. Turkey has also hosted many Asian leaders, with the most recent being Mahathir Mohamad. The Malaysian Prime Minister said Turkey could be an alternative source of imports for his country, and that both nations have not focused on trade as much as they should have. Under the Asia Anew initiative, it's a gap that's sure to narrow. Turkey stands at a crossroad between Europe and Asia, but for decades, Turkey's priorities for strategic and economic reasons were mainly directed towards the West. But with the Asia Anew initiative, that policy is about to change. It's not about abandoning the West, but rather Turkey diversifying its direction to fully capitalize on the changing global shift now underway. Ömer Kablan, Straight Talk.
And joining me now is Çağdaş Üngör Sunar, who is an associate professor at Marmara University, where she specializes in Turkey-China relations, and from London, Shin Sun, who is a lecturer at Low China Institute at King's College, London. Thank you both for being me on Straight Talk. Shin, I'd like to start with you. We all know that Turkey is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and how will that play in this new Asia Anew initiative? What kind of cooperation we are likely to see in the future?
Okay, Belt and Road Initiative is a giant policy frame that provides resources for other countries, for participant countries to build infrastructure. And I think it provides for many countries, including Turkey, alternative resources, alternative source of funding to meet its previously unmet need for infrastructure. From this perspective, getting closely involved in the Belt and Road Initiative will actually provide huge benefits for Turkey in terms of this, infrastructure projects. And also, since, connectivity is an important policy issue in Turkey's own economic development plans. So I think the Belt and Road is going to make a big contribution there.
Okay, so Çağdaş, we also know that Turkey has had long ties with the region for centuries, both historic and cultural ties. How different will this Asia Anew initiative actually be, in your opinion?
Well, this is basically a response to the rise of Asia Pacific, which has been going on at least since 1990s. And the major actors here has been China and India. Although we are not talking about India much these days, China is still a very influential actor. And Turkey is, I believe, planning to make the best of the situation and gear its economy and probably political orientation as well a little bit towards this region in order to match the changing circumstances.
But as we look at the numbers, there's a great trade deficit for Turkey when we take a look at its trade volume with China, and also when we take a look at Turkey-India trade relations, they just stand at modest like $8 billion. So do you believe Turkey will take additional and more effective steps to improve the situation in its favor?
Well, for Turkey to do that, to be able to achieve that, this is not, we need to understand that this is not a foreign policy question.
What is it?
It's also about Turkish economy. In order to, for instance, be more active in the world markets, especially with the production of value-added goods and the export orientation, because Turkey did not really enjoy such an advantageous position in that regard. For instance, the number one export material that we sell to China is marble. If we continue selling raw materials to Asia-Pacific countries, we will not really gain such a... Yeah, the deficit will continue, and we will never have the leverage we are intending to get out of the Asia-Pacific century.
Okay, so I want to get back to Shin, who is joining us from London. Shin, do you think the deep-seated transatlantic economic relationships have now been, in a way, replaced with the Eurasian system? What do you make of that?
I think, of course, that economically speaking, the region of Asia is on the rise very rapidly in the past decades. And the economic potential and the market potential has been the focus of the foreign policy of the majority of countries in the world. Of course, we see an economic reorientation from the traditional developed countries to developing countries, especially China and India. This is very important for Turkey's recent policy. And I think the reorientation of Turkey's policy from the west to the east actually reflect this priority on Asia. However, a lot of things are actually conditional on the assumption that the Chinese and the Asian economy will actually sustain its rapid growth for the next few decades. And this is actually debatable whether this will be the case. And the policy outcomes actually depends on whether this assumption is valid or not.
So, Çağdaş, European Union countries are also signing free trade agreements with Asian countries, as well as they are trying to safeguard for example, their energy agreements with Iran against despite U.S. sanctions. To which extent you believe U.S.-China trade war impacted Western countries to search for more in Asian countries?
Well, certainly this trade war between China and the United States has been a surprise to many, and it is certainly out of the WTO regulations. So, this is not an issue. The thing between China and the United States is not an issue that is normally solvable in bilateral terms. But Donald Trump has been very keen on, containing China in that regard. And the prospect, the long-term prospect in that is quite unpredictable, really, because even Turkish economy might get hurt in the middle because this war has quite unpredictable outcomes, such as it is causing fluctuations in foreign currency markets as well.
Is this the reason why the European countries are facing towards the Asian markets, or they have planned it way before?
That's been going on at least since the 1990s. Okay. And although in some countries, for instance, such as Germany, the public is quite the unfavorable opinions with regard to China in terms of human rights issues, several other political issues, the trade and business investment, etc., has been seen completely out of this realm. So the German government and the business circles has been very, very keen on investing in China and making the best of the situation in economic terms. So it has been going on for some while.
Okay, so I want to get back to Shin. Shin, everybody talks about Asia. They say future is in Asian century is about to begin, etc. So from a latest report, we know that there are going to be 1.75 billion middle-class consumers in Asia by 2020. And experts also say that this is a historic shift in history. What do you make of that?
Well, definitely. I think given the past economic performance in for example, the past 2 decades, and also given the huge population and the market potential of the Asian market, especially China and India, this has become, and it will continue to be, a huge business opportunity, economic opportunities for all countries all around the world, not only developed countries like United States, Japan, or Europe, but also other developing countries to do businesses with Asia.
All right, Shin, I want to get back to Çağdaş. Çağdaş, how Asia, do you think, managed to do better than other geographies in terms of rising living standards and development?
Well, since the 1990s, again, and thanks mostly to India and China, since both of these countries are giants in terms of their demographic size, they have been the winners of the globalization era and also the rising stars in, for instance, the United Nations reports, because their living standards and their alleviation of poverty has indeed contributed to these statistics globally in a positive way. And this is a huge achievement, of course. But from now on, since 2008 global economic crisis, things have become a little bit more complicated, and especially with the most recent American-Chinese trade war, which sort of curbs down international standards on trade as well. And with the rising of anti-globalization sentiment all around the world, with the rise of populist governments in Europe and elsewhere, it's again very hard to predict.
Okay, so I think we're out of time now. Shin, I would like to thank you for joining us from London. And Çağdaş, thanks for joining me on set. Appreciate it a lot. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Asia Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.